Hello again and welcome back to our course on Excel 2019 Advanced. In this section, we're going to look at some of the most important aspects of using date and time functions in Excel 2019. Now, we're not going to look in detail at formatting. I'm going to assume you're somewhat familiar with formatting, although there will be examples coming up throughout the course, but I want to talk about actual date and time processing first. We've looked at storage in the preceding section, and as a first step in this, I want to look at one of the examples we're going to be developing as we go through the course, and that is the creation of a company invoice. Now let's suppose that I put an invoice date on my invoice. And in fact, there are two dates associated with this invoice. That's invoice date and due date. Now, first of all, one way that we could populate the invoice date field is by using the today function. And the today function, as you would expect, gives the date today. So we just type in equals today, and we have our empty parentheses. So I want you to note that this is one of those functions that doesn't need any arguments. Obviously, I could also change the format if I wanted to. Now, the due date could potentially be a date a certain number of days beyond that date. And one way of doing this would be to say that the due date is 30 days after the invoice date. So how do you find a date 30 days after the invoice date? Well, remember the invoice date will be stored as a number of days. So in fact, all I really need to do here is put a link to cell C2 and plus 30. And we can just do a quick visual check and I can see that that does in fact look correct. As we work through the balance of this course, we're going to continue to develop this invoice, but there are still a few points to make here about dates and times. And the first is that if I click in C2, the definition of the date there is that it is today. Of course, if I was to close this workbook and open it again tomorrow, the date in there would be tomorrow's date, as it's always going to show the current date. Now, what about if you wanted to put in a static date, which may well be the case with something like an invoice? The way you put in a static date is not to use a function. You could either type the date into the cell, or there's a handy keyboard shortcut of Control, semicolon, and that will input a static date into the cell. Now, apart from the today function, which gives you the current date, there's also the now function. The now function gives you the time and the date right now. So let's type in equals now. And again, we have our empty parentheses because this is a function that doesn't require any arguments. And you can see there we've got our usual string of hashes, which just means that we need to widen that column ever so slightly and make a bit more room. And there you go. There's also another keyboard shortcut that you could use just to input the current time into a cell, and that's Control, Shift, semicolon. So it's really worth remembering this point. C2 is dynamic and D2 is static. So having looked at today and now, let's look at another important function. Let's suppose you're importing some data from another system, and what you have is several dates, such as the one in D7, but they are text dates. How do you make them into dates? For example, so that you can store them as regular dates in Excel 2019. The function you use for that is the date value function. So I'm going to go up to Formulas, and I'm going to go to my date and time drop down in my functions library. And you can see the second one down is date value. And as my argument, I'm going to select cell D7 and click OK. So Excel has converted that to a number, so I can just go and apply some date formatting. And I'm going to select the top one, click on OK, and now I have that formatted as a short date. The next set of date and time functions I'd like to look at is a set of 6 functions that can separate out for me the year number, the month number, and the day number, down to the second number of any given date and time. I'm going to use the date in cell D4. Just bear in mind that a minute or two has now passed since D4 was last updated, so it's slightly out of date right now. But if in F4 I use the year function, so again I'm going to go up to my date and time, and it's right at the bottom. I'm going to select year, and I'm going to select cell D4 as my argument, click on OK, and it pulls back 2019. Now when I invoked the year function, what actually happened is cell D4 updates. So you'll see now that the time has refreshed and it is now the current time. Let me do the same for month. So again, up to date and time, and select month. I'm going to use the same cell as my argument, cell D4. And again, watch when I click on OK, you should see that time update. And there we go. Let's fill out the rest of them so I can show you all 6. So we're going to do up to date and time. We're going to do day. Select cell D4 again. And again, you'll see this update. So those 6 functions can be used to isolate the year, month, day, hour, minute, and second. Any change made to cell values anywhere on this sheet will cause that value to be updated. So if I was just to add a 1 in here, you'll see when I hit enter, everything will refresh. And there we go. And hopefully you saw that minute changed just there. Now I've already shown you how to get a date from a text date, but there is another way that you can build dates as well. And in fact, you can use a similar approach for times, and that is to use the date function. And what the date function does is to build a date from 3 constituent parts. Now what I'm going to do is first invoke the date function. So again, let's jump up to date and time, and date is the top one. So I'm going to choose a year number, so let's say 2018. I'm going to say the month 11 and the day 10, and click OK. Now I don't have to use constant values for those arguments. I could in fact use values from other cells on the worksheet. So for instance, instead of 2018, and I'm just working up in the formula bar now, I'm going to double click, I'm going to delete it, and I could say take the year and then specify a cell reference. So I'm going to select cell D4 and close my parentheses. I'm going to do the same for month. So let's delete that out. And take it from D4. And then finally, we're going to say day and take that from D4 like so. And there we go. Our answer in D11 replicates what we have in D2, which is correct. Now, what about if I wanted to add 30 days to the date in D11? Well, all I need to do is click just before that last parentheses and click plus 30 and hit enter. And there we go. And we can just do another visual check, and I can see that yes, that looks like it's 30 days. And I can just do a visual check, and I can see that yes, this new date in D11 is 30 days beyond the date in D2. So we've looked at some very important date and time functions in this section. There are 2 or 3 others I need to go through with you, but we're going to cover those in the next section. I've saved this workbook into the course files folder as Date Functions 1 in case you want to go in and have a little play around with it. So I will see you in the next section.